Hello and welcome to another episode of Whither the Looniversity, the podcast of the Peerless Review. I'm Adam Elwanger, and I'm excited about my guest today, who's a personal friend of mine. You might know him as Dr. Alex Petkas. You might know him as Ancient Life Coach, or you might know him from his Cost of Glory podcast, which profiles the lives of people of antiquity and talks about their glorious goings on and how we could translate that into an ethic for life in our age.
It's a good
Alex
description.
Alex and I met after I had written something for I Am 1776. He has written for Man's World. He's written for the American Conservative, has a forthcoming piece in the American Mind. He's published some things for Antigone, in addition to his many scholarly articles. He is a Princeton trained classicist. And on top of that, he had an assistant professorship at Cal State University, Fresno, and he had the balls to quit it. And I want to talk to him a little bit about that today. Alex, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Adam. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. Classics is a strange field, and I don't know if you've ever read the book White Noise by Don DeLillo. But in that book, the main character, I think, is a professor of German, and he's terrified that people will find out that he doesn't know how to speak German. And similarly, I'm a professor of rhetoric, and I don't know Greek or Latin, but you do, and so I'm constantly in awe of your scholarly repose when it comes to all things classical. I wonder, how did you get into the field of classics, like, to begin with? What attracted you to that?
Yeah. Well, it's a it's a long story. I'll try to condense it. I took Latin in middle school and high school in a very lackadaisical manner. Um, I with little intention, to do anything serious with it. But I started to enjoy it like my senior year. I was a terrible student, but that ended up being a subject that I kind of pulled the nosedive up.
Not terrible enough to keep you out of the Ivies as an undergrad, right?
Well, I did my undergrad at Trinity University in San
Okay.
Antonio. So, and then I kind of pulled the nose up around my senior year of high school, and discovered I really liked Latin, and after that I was a pretty good student in college, because I kind of found what I wanted to, or found things that interested me. And one of them was when I got to college, it was music theory and music, and I was playing the guitar a lot and in the jazz band. I got the advice from my parents to just kind of pursue your passion, which is terrible advice almost always. So, but I did it, and I was doing that, and I was double majoring in music, and communications. And actually, we had a pretty good rhetoric program at Trinity, and it was in the rhetoric program, and communications at Trinity was like media theory on one half, and then like rhetoric and public speaking on the other half. And so I first read basically anything of the Greeks. I guess I read like the Iliad in high school, but very lackadaisically, and didn't like it. And then we read Plato and Aristotle in a classical rhetorical theory class. And I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. And so I happened to be reading a lot of church history at the time too. So I was just reading a lot of subjects that interested me. And I became a more serious Christian when I was in high school. And so I was interested in like delving more into that and the history of Christianity. And I was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church. So there was a very historical component to it, wanting to go back to like, how do I explain to my Protestant friends, like, why we do all the things that we do? And you really have to go back deep for that. And so I was kind of, it scratched a lot of itches for me intellectually, the things that I was just curious about. And the short story is, I started taking ancient Greek when my junior year, because there was no other option for learning Greek. I wanted to learn modern Greek so I could connect with my heritage. We're been in America for like 100 years. And I thought it would be just like a side thing. But it ended up, I suddenly realized, oh, if you learn ancient Greek, then you can read the church fathers, you can read the Bible, you could also read Plato and Aristotle and like understand these works better. And I had a very charismatic, intelligent, brilliant teacher at Trinity, who's a younger guy, just like 10 years older than me, and he kind of became a mentor to me. And so I think it was taking that class with him and really seeing that classics was something that I really loved about music theory. Is there was a kind of rigor and a method and a system that I just really just that appealed to me. It was something I could master, and a skill that if I mastered it, then I could go on to, maybe go into a graduate program and get paid for a while. Theoretically, if you get a scholarship stipend to like study more of this stuff and get good at Greek. So I think the skills aspect of classics really appealed to me. And it also, wanted to be a better public speaker. And, that's what the sophists promised. And so there's so many different angles in classics. You can study church history, kind of, if you just read about the, history of the Roman Empire. You can go into ancient Greek philosophy. You can study military history. It was kind of like, it seems to me like a combination of this smorgasbord discipline where I didn't have to pick on, just do religious studies and you're going to be talking about religion for the rest of your life if you become a professor, or rhetoric or whatever. There was a smorgasbord aspect, but there was like a hard skill foundation aspect that really appealed to me. That I was much more of a math and science kid in high school, and so I really liked that about classics. That learning the languages is like pretty objective, and it's hard, and the grammar is complicated, but it makes sense. That there's like a logic to it. And so for a lot of reasons, I decided to at least run with this for a while. I wasn't convinced really at any point along the way that I wanted to be a professor for the rest of my life, but it was kind of assumed once I got to grad school that that's what you do and that's what we're here to do. We're here to train you to be a professor. And so I went with it for a while. And that's sort of how I ended up kind of pursuing my interest and falling into this groove.
So this is, since I've known you, one of the things that's fascinated me. You're some years younger than I am, and you had acquired a tenure-track professorship at a good research university. You had a good publication record. You probably could have been tenured. And it would have been a cushy job that you could hold for the next 30 or 40 years. But you decided not to go that route ultimately. And I want to hear about, did you quit the university or did the university quit you? And what were the factors that contributed to that decision?
I got a job at Fresno State, and I was really excited to get it. My friends were saying, "Oh, that's a great starter job," and it was. Hang on one second. Sorry.
Sure. He's talking to his little one right now, I think.
Yeah, the joys of working from home.
Mm-hmm.
But so I but we really liked Fresno. I liked being close to Yosemite and Sequoia. In my department, they were nice and just really like sane. I was in the like modern languages like Spanish and
Mm-hmm.
Portuguese, French, kind of modern European languages department. And yeah, it would have been really easy to get tenure. I'd done most of it already, and but I I think the short story, well, so the immediate cause rather was, we were both from Texas, and we had a daughter. that just tried to walk in the room right now. But we just had a new baby, and we were thinking about what the next 30 years was going to look like. And I would have been comfortable kind of settling down in Fresno in a lot of ways. I was like, I don't really believe in like, pro athlete approach to the academic career necessarily, where you just like ping around until you're nearly 50 and you finally get the coveted like Northeast liberal arts school cushy job where I'm not from that culture really. And so um so and I had a job opportunity here. I should say that made it a lot easier. It's a family business that I'm working at now.
Here is Houston.
Here in Houston, yeah, in the industrial paint industry. It's completely different. And so like I had this other opportunity to come back home and work and make an honest living. And that was kind of what enabled it. I think I'd sort of gotten disillusioned already with academia. The other really, the simplest way to put it is I really enjoyed classics too much to I don't know. I really believed in what I took to be our mission as classicists.
What's that?
Well, I took it to be our job is we're the people who know the classical languages and understand the ancient, Greeks and Romans. And our job is to kind of pass that knowledge on to the next generation and to kind of sing its praises. It's not about lionizing everybody and everything, but to say, isn't it cool what like isn't Homer amazing? Isn't Plato fascinating? Like, look at the impact that these writers have had on our culture. Isn't it wonderful to know Greek and Latin? Doesn't that explain so much about where our experience today that you didn't even realize you were just scratching the surface? And I sort of felt like increasingly at least the leadership of the discipline were not really on my team in that effort. Like there wasn't a sense of common mission to, because as we've talked about many times, classics is a discipline, has been a discipline in decline for a long time. And so I think when I started to realize that as I spent more time teaching and going to more professional events and more conferences and just kind of like getting a sense of the mood and seeing the pronouncements that the kind of gatekeepers in our discipline would make publicly, I thought, oh well, why should I be a part of this organization if they're not even they don't really care about promoting classics? Yeah,
give us an idea of some of these pronouncements. If the leadership and the sort of standard bearers of the discipline are making these kind of pronouncements, and you said that it felt as though they saw a different mission than you saw. What were the pronouncements and what was the mission in their eyes?
Well, when I was getting further on in grad school in the mid 20 teens, let's say, looking at the job market increasingly, we started to hear a lot more about outreach, about how it's a good thing to have public outreach or that kind of like missional activity on your CV. Excuse me. And I thought that meant like sharing the great things about ancient philosophy or just getting more people interested in what we do. But it really kind of wasn't about that. Like if you grew up in Texas, like or probably like most states in the United States, if you if you tell people on the street that you're a classicist, you study classics, like, what are they going to think? Okay, here's what we assumed that they would think in the classics departments in these rarefied circles that we were running in at the Ivy Leagues was, oh, that's really, wow, that's really serious and prestigious. Wow, the Greeks and Romans, you must be smart. But that's not actually what people think. People are like, what the hell is that? It's
Right.
like you're,
Or
I'm
if they
studying
think
Martian.
they know, they think that you study like Jane Austen and
Yeah,
Mark Twain and Dostoevsky.
Beethoven.
Right.
Yeah. Um,
So what did
yes.
they mean by outreach then? Because as a sort of distant observer of that discipline, it seems to me, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, that in the mouths of the speakers of that discipline, outreach means classics isn't diverse enough as a field, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that we need to, it's really sort of part of the DEI thing. Diversity,
Yeah.
equity, inclusion demands a diversification of the discipline. And also that means sort of viewpoint diversity, which brings in people who are much more critical of the idea of classics as a discipline to begin with, which is the maintenance of a particular intellectual heritage that, in their view, uh, is a means to maintain certain forms of power and oppression, various things. Do I have it right, or is that wrong?
Yeah, I don't think I even need to answer the question now. That's that's basically it. Yeah, like it was really just a more it was like a diversity agenda that was really much more like by outreach they kind of meant more not white people on the on the reading list. And that the assumption was that that was what more people were interested in. A
Well,
pretty big assumption.
what does that look like? Like in a classics department, how do you de-white the reading list? I mean, that's going to
Mm.
be it's a big, pretty big task, really.
Yeah, it's not easy. Well, one way is to say, I'm going to cough here, excuse me. One way is to say, Greek and Latin is not really what the classics, that doesn't exhaust the classics. So what Princeton recently did, kind of, I think a lot of people know this in academia, they removed Greek and Latin as requirements to get a classics degree, and for undergrads. And their justification for this, or their explanation for this, when they were challenged on this, was we don't want people to do less Greek and Latin. We just want them to also be able to do other things like Sanskrit or
Aramaic.
Akkadian, Aramaic, and yeah, so on and so on. And I think that those languages are fascinating. I mean, I studied some Syriac and Arabic, and when I was in grad school, and great, curious people want to do other stuff. That's great, but and like studying the Persians more seriously, and the Ethiopians and the Egyptians, and how they interact with the Greeks and Romans. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that that's just in the canonical texts, like Herodotus, and
Yeah.
you know, um,
Well,
and
it's
on and on
also
and
there's
on.
this assumption that Greco-Roman texts are somehow white,
Right,
It's like
right.
you take somebody like Augustine, and it's like, well, is Augustine white? I mean, he's an African, right?
Hmm.
He's not black African.
Right.
But that it seems as though that, like when we look at Augustine, we don't see diverse, we see tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so like you can kind of point to these many examples of how we're not so white, but that's not really satisfying to just redefine, the canon. Like, you know, the Greeks aren't as white as you think. They don't care that much about whiteness, or they don't care about race as much, or at least not in the same ways as we do. They certainly care about, Greeks versus barbarians, and they think they're superior. Like everybody thinks that they're
Greeks versus
superior.
non-Greeks, right?
Hmm.
Like they have a
Yeah.
sense of themselves as, contrary to our society, they don't have the oikophobia, right?
Hmm.
They don't hate themselves,
Right.
which is of course the problem, I assume.
Yeah. That's yeah. Well, um, so one way to do it is to, try to expand the languages. And I think that's kind of one of the problems with that is If you started in your freshman year with ancient Greek and you just did, ancient Greek every semester of every year of a 4-year degree, by the end, if you're just doing the classes and not like busting your ass in the summer with intensive summer programs, but just doing the classes, like you're not really going to know ancient Greek very well at all. And it's really hard to learn these languages. It's really hard to master the cultures, to say nothing of doing Latin at the same time and trying to, read some of the text and translation and master the kind of knowledge that it takes. It ends up being just a really thin smattering potentially of a bunch of just old things without really having kind of mastered anything. And I think that that's really unsatisfying for a lot of students. And so that's like a problem with trying to diversify, is it's really, you kind of take the challenge out of it in a lot of ways by you lower the standards inevitably. But the other way that, that the outreach, let's say, or, in outreach defined as kind of like diversifying the curriculum works, is just studying the topic of race and gender and these like identity, what I would probably call identity politics issues in antiquity. And if you begin with the fact that those aren't really the most important things to these people for the most part, you end up kind of talking about peripheral issues a lot. And I took a whole seminar on race in antiquity as a grad seminar. Part of the reason I wanted to take it was because there was a free trip to Israel packaged in that course.
Good deal.
So it was kind of like it was like a field trip seminar. So that's my, not so, I wasn't that interested in the subject, but I wanted to give it a chance. And I ended up just being more convinced that it's a really boring topic, that the people that, I don't know, that it's not that interesting a story. Like the race is kind of, they're aware of skin color is a way of identifying people of a different race. But then again, they're darkish Greeks and men are dark and women are light. And, race is a social construct, and yet it's got a biological basis. And so, I don't know, like it's all kind of common sense at the end of the day. And I don't know, we could have been spending time talking about like the Iliad's contemplation of human mortality or what is truly valuable in life. And I don't know, this just seems like you kind of skirt around what's really profound about, the greatest texts of the ancient world.
This is one of the problems in the field of English too, is that rather than teaching texts, right, and teaching aesthetics, right, what makes this text a great text? What makes this text a beautiful text? What happens in this text? The entire discipline is taken over by a kind of presentism that says, what can we make this text do? Right? Like, how can we enlist this text in the service of this or that ideological project? Or if we can't, then the trajectory becomes criticizing the ideological project that it does serve. And it sounds to me like the way you're describing it, the classics has kind of been taken over by this presentism too. That it's no longer about sort of a clear-eyed assessment of what the inheritance is that was bequeathed to us in these texts, that rather it's about what can we make them do? How can we use this?
Yeah, that's interesting how you put that. Excuse me. So like one of the ways that it's formulated often in our discipline is people come to classics to get away from contemporary issues. They want to enter another worlds. They want to have this kind of contemplative space where you immerse yourself in another culture. And, unlike with the modern language, you can't just go there you have to immerse yourself through deep study and through kind of um sympathizing with the culture. And I think learning the language is a really important aspect of that.
It seems like that you're saying that people come to classics often seeking an encounter with the unfamiliar, and
Hmm.
the way that the kind of newbies in the field now are doing it is familiarizing the unfamiliar, sort of
Hmm.
reinventing it as something that's much nearer to us, which kind of kills the exotic and the the foreign elements of it.
Yeah, and it's if the object is to find, okay, for example, like, you know, a queer interpretation of Catullus, where you're kind of like looking at male desire and Catullus is, like making fun of uh people for their, homosexual habits, and like threatening to commit homosexual acts on people to, to like shame them and stuff. And they're like, if you I don't know, like if you come to the text looking for the things that obsess us now in our current political moment, you you end up sort of not listening to what their agenda is potentially. And um yeah, I think it kind of takes the profundity out of it. So I you know and it's so difficult to really, there's a lot that's really different about their, like Homer's take on life. I mean, it's just frankly hierarchical. Some humans are more valuable than other humans. There's a kind of way to monetize, or there's a way to quantify that. Like, how much would you be ransomed for if you got captured? Like, that's pretty much like a pretty objective way of determining who is more valuable in society. Achilles
and
probably the highest, that would fetch the highest price. So ergo,
and
he's the best.
probably 95% of the demos would be $0,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
um
Like most of us are peons. And, to really get into their mindset, and to say that you can, um, that you could like have a conversation with a person like that, and share a, a meal together, theoretically, with a person like that, to get into their mind enough that you could be a guest in their house, and not get thrown out for being, rude. That's a difficult skill, and it takes a lot of patience and humility. I think that's a lot of it. It's kind of about approaching these texts with a certain humility, and listening to them. And I mean, I don't share Homer's values, but there's something really, um, like, some of the deep value of what we do is really, getting that distance, that perspective on ourselves, to see, well, a lot, in as the Greeks were constantly talking about, a lot what we consider to be uh universals is our particulars. And when it comes to customs, nomos is king, like custom is king. It's the thing that Herodotus talks about, like, the Egyptians bury their dead this way, and the Persians, leave them out to be eaten by birds, and the Greeks burn them. And everybody looks at the other guy and says, that's impious and sacrilegious, and how could you do that? And, this is what you get when you study other cultures. And the Greeks, they're already doing that. And, you need to kind of inhabit that frame of mind with them, and so I think that takes humility. And I think that, you know going overly political really is a big stumbling block for people, especially undergrads who really need to have it modeled for them.
so in my discipline, and I think in many humanities disciplines, classics as a field has become kind of a metonym for obsolescence. that this is a field in decline, that it will soon disappear. You've got an inside view on that. I mean, what would you say are the field's prospects for a revitalization? I ask, especially in the context of some of the high profile people in your field. Some of the people have said that classics more or less needs to be burnt down, right? That this is an inheritance that is not worth inheriting. And so do the people in the discipline now have the fortitude it's going to take to push back on that? And if so, is there a path for a revitalization of the discipline?
The decline of classics has been, it comes up again and again in this country because the kind of starting point is around 1900. It used to be that the Harvard and Yale and Princeton would require you to pass a Greek and Latin exam before you even were admitted. So, all the founding fathers and so on, and anybody college educated up to that point, and other universities, as I understand, had similar standards. So that was dropped. That requirement was dropped in the around 1900 as a result of the progressive view, the progressive movement that's associated with somebody like John Dewey, where that's the past. America's the future. We don't really need that. It's fine, but let's not make antiquity the priority. That's like an old world kind of way of, and we're trying to create the new future. And we have to study these new great sciences like psychology and sociology and free up space for.
Well, they've bequeathed us such gifts.
Mm-hmm. And that really accelerated with the cultural movement of the 60s and 70s, where you just saw schools closing down their Latin programs, high schools, and the trend has been down for so long, and it's accelerated, and especially in the past, I'd say 15 years or so. So the discipline is already dying, and it's just embers at this point. And somebody like my old colleague at Princeton, Donnell Padilla Peralta, he's saying, well, if it's going to be this, whatever it is now, or then it should die. Which what it is now, allegedly, is white and patriarchal and cisgender, and which is really not even that. It's not even true of our discipline anymore. I mean, our discipline, if you look at hires over the past 20 or 30 years, I mean, it's just a stark majority women, actually. This is not a male dominated field by any stretch. And so I think then you go, well, there's a kind of a patriarchal attitude towards the sources and the text. And there's we are kind of the quintessential patriarchy discipline. We're the patriarchy of Western civilization, right? The most normative, the most elite. We were at some point 120 years ago, but not anymore. We're pretty much dead in the water. And so I think the outlook is bleak for classics at a university level. But there's this interesting revival of interest in classical education that you see happening kind of organically outside the universities, outside the public schools, charter schools to some extent, private schools. And there are a lot of people that at least want what they think that classics is, trying to teach our kids Latin and Greek and reading Plutarch. And I think that's that movement seems to be really picking up speed, and there's a political edge because as some leading thinkers in this movement have pointed out, classics didn't fall off a cliff. It was pushed, there was a deliberate move to extricate this, cultural granite, because it was seen as an impediment to the progressive vision of America as whatever they were envisioning America as. So I think we're going to see more of a pushback, and it's going to probably get dragged more into the culture wars, and it's just going to be a numbers game. And I don't see the classicists in universities really drawing a whole lot of new blood to the discipline for their progressive, like everything from, you know, basically kind of like gut the canon and toss out the language requirements, and fill it up with the quota of groups that they want to be hired, and majoring in classics. I mean, I just I don't see them being able to put up a really good fight against the new cultural energy long term demographically that's just going to be behind, like, let's teach our kids Greek and Latin from the classical education movement. Let's The Greeks are cool, Homer's fun, Plato's really interesting, Christianity generally good, even if you're not a Christian. Like, all of that is going to have an effect over time. And so I think the discipline is going to really look very different in 10 or 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's either going to be relevant to what most people think of as the classics after they've spent 15 years educating their kids in this, and a new crop of classically educated Americans comes up, or it's just going to be, not that relevant. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. My kids are studying Latin. At this
Mm-hmm.
point, my daughter probably knows more than I do. Um, that seems to me kind of tragic. I wonder. You said that that your discipline is sort of predominantly female now. Do you think that was there just some new spark of interest among women in classics, or do you think that this is a product of the efforts to diversify the professorate?
Yeah. Well, um,
It's kind of a dangerous question, I know.
yeah, it is a dangerous question. I mean, I'd say that, the efforts that they put in seem to have paid off for sure. Yeah, it's and there's definitely been a huge boom in, gender studies books and dissertations, and senior theses, and there's a lot to talk about. Women made up probably about half the population in antiquity, and they had their own experiences. They weren't authors very often. Sappho, a good notable exception. I wrote my dissertation on a student of Hypatia of Alexandria,
Diotima.
very interesting woman. Diotima and Plato's Symposium, and many, noble Roman women who impacted history. And so,
Aspasia.
so there's a lot of interesting things to talk about, but you know, and so I think there's been a lot of effort made to appeal to women, to make the curriculum appeal to women, and it's come at a cost of, a big kind of feeder subject for what we do has been military history, the great battles and the great commanders, and that's just really uncool now in classics departments. To Like, the military historians don't get jobs, or they're not seen as relevant, and they end up leaving and working in finance, and then writing popular books maybe, or whatever. I mean, and so the military history talent is fleeing the discipline, uh which is a shame, because that's always going to appeal to energetic young men who go on to make money and fund classics programs. I mean, there's a reason that it was constituted the way that it was. And so we've swung pretty far in a certain direction, and I think we're just like not serving the whole of our constituency very well.
So let's move to a discussion of the university more broadly. The trends that you've been describing are happening in one way or another across the disciplines of the humanities. The larger sort of culture shift that is informing or speeding the humanities decline is very much in power in the administrations of the universities. And so I think it's safe to say that at this point, the universities have been wholly institutionally captured by the cultural left, and that the people who run universities are overwhelmingly dedicated towards putting some of the ideological principles of progressive leftism into practice at the institutional level. So do you have ideas about how we can save the university, or are we just screwed? Or, you know, uh, do you have a vision what you might like to see the future look like, or talk to us a little about that?
Yeah, there's the political pressure coming upon the university, um, which is really toxic for the brand. That's just it's just gonna it's not gonna happen overnight, but it's losing credibility. The whole idea of having to go to college and the university as being a place where you get enlightened and expand your mind. And the one that you and I entered university with, that I think was a very fair characterization. And it probably, I'm sure it still is at a lot of places. So it's a shame that um that that the institution, just as an idea, is losing a lot of credibility. Um and the other pressure on it is from the internet, where it's now possible to build up a reputation as an expert without reference to institutions at all, by uh consistently producing good content on YouTube or a podcast or whatever it is,
The
or
Millerman
Substack.
model.
The Millerman model, yeah. And a lot of these people who are exiting, a lot of it is academics exiting, such as myself, Millerman, Justin Murphy, and but I think increasingly, I don't know, there's there's a way that the internet kind of is a great meritocracy for intellectual discourse, and I think that that's, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just you can't fight it. You can't really fight it, I think. And so that that's going to eat away increasingly at the necessity of going to a 4-year college, and certainly, it's, I think it's going to hit subjects that are subject to being to competition more, like classics would maybe be an example. Certainly English and philosophy, there's just so much great stuff out there happening without reference to institutions. Um you don't need to get a degree to just read a ton of philosophy and understand it. I mean, there there's certainly people who don't have that institutional training have a lot of blind spots often, or but they're probably pretty good at covering them up if they've gotten a million YouTube subscribers. So I think um if you the institutions that don't respond to that competition well, or don't think hard about what it is that the value that they offer is, are going to suffer. And I think it's another thing that, so I my thinking about this is sort of informed by my study of ancient intellectuals. Like, I wrote my dissertation on basically ancient philosophers, not the philosophy so much as their social networks, some of the philosophy, but they're, it's not that original when you get to 5th century AD, and they're basically still Platonists. But looking at how they pay for themselves. Most philosophers in the Roman Empire are really paying most of their bills by teaching rhetoric, and philosophy is a little side gig that they do, and they have a network of people interested in this that they keep in touch with via letters, and but they have to find what it is that they can offer that they can sell, and so that gives an ancient philosopher a kind of like direct entrepreneurial approach to writing, beautifully, to writing in a way that normal people can understand. And this is one of the things that you get when you read Plutarch. That my podcast is really based on Plutarch's lives. I'm basically trying to kind of retell Plutarch's lives and convert them into audio form. Plutarch is a philosopher that really figured out how to communicate, because he figured out, he didn't have this whole superstructure telling him that what he was doing was valuable. He had to just convince people on a day-to-day basis. And I think that really makes a big difference. And so there's a real there's a lot of disincentives to answering the market demand within institutions. You have all of these pressures to publish things in certain journals so you can tick off your requirements for tenure or promotion. But those things might have very little relationship, if any at all, to what's really going to get traction in the public sphere. What's really going to get traction, just like what's going to attract people to your institution. In a lot of ways, like you have an opportunity, if you unleashed your professoriate to be your department, to go out there and like force them to stand in front of people and entertain them. How could you accomplish that, and how would that change the way that you would set up your systems? I mean, there's a lot of inertia, and I think being nimble. Yeah, I would want to be nimble right now. That's one of the reasons why I left, because I saw there's going to be new opportunities opening up. A lot of institutions are going to weather this, but they're going to look different. Some of them are going to fail. There's going to be a lot of just chaos, and a chaotic situation is one in which you want to be nimble, I think. So
I talked
kind of a long-winded answer.
Someone who works at a conservative think tank, a acquaintance of mine, and asked them what the think tank's policy is on the universities, and they said just to crush it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then what about people like me? And he said, don't worry, once it's rubble, we'll go through and pick up the gems. And I sometimes I think that's what has to happen. But you're right, like, and part of the problem is, and this is why I think the universities are going to fail, is so many professors have never had to give a moment's thought to what they have of value to provide the general public or people who aren't academics. I mean, they've been in the system where it's just presumed by the institution that it has value for its own sake.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're asked to make it real for people who have limited time, limited money, and a limited attention span, they have absolutely no ability to respond to the demands there.
Yeah, like if you think about like how much more does a finance degree cost than an English major? Like at a lot of places it costs the exact same amount. Yeah. Well, how much more does how many more credits, like I don't know, how much more do you pay for 3 physics credits than you pay for 3 gender studies credits? Like you pay the same amount typically for
the lab fees would be the only difference.
Yeah, lab fees, and so there's a kind of like mystification of the real economy that's going on there. And I think that's really detrimental Like, I'm not saying that physics is worth that much more than gender studies. I'm saying you don't know, really.
Mhm.
You're not really in contact with the financial decision making process of your consumers. And so I think that that really that shields you from a lot of feedback. And I'm not saying criticism, I'm saying feedback. Like if you want to have a successful enterprise, if you want to innovate, you need to have real feedback. You need to really know if what you're doing is working. And so like that I'd be looking for that right now if I were still in academia. I'd be trying to find ways that I could get real feedback. And if I were an administrator, trying to find ways that I could really, you know, import that into the incentive structure somehow.
Mhm.
But that's very difficult to do.
So you're still making moves. And I described your podcast, Cost of Glory, a little bit. It's fantastic. People can find it on Twitter, and you on Twitter, I think, at Cost of Glory. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. If any podcast platform, it's on there.
So tell us a little bit in your own words about, you said that you're sort of revamping Plutarch's Lives. But tell us a little bit more about your objectives there.
Well, I'm hoping to uh, make Plutarch's Lives more accessible to regular people. It's it was like the second most popular book after the Bible in the 18th century in America. Just a very influential text. Excuse me. Um, and it's I think telling stories about great statesmen and commanders and orators is like it's like a spiritually uplifting activity. And Plutarch's Lives are just incredibly entertaining. They're very like um kind of scene worthy. They're there's lots of famous paintings made from these like famous scenes of Plutarch's Lives. They're very Hollywood at times. And but if you just listen to them on an audio recording, they're kind of dense and there's a lot of names and places that you don't know. And you can read them if you have time to just sit down and read them and look the things up. You could get through them pretty quickly, especially if you have an edition that has notes. And it's not like they're just forbiddingly hard to get through, but I wanted to make a version of Plutarch's Lives in a way. I'm retelling them in my own way with like modern narrative techniques and just a little bit of sound effects and music, just a and
You've also got
uh
the voice for it. I mean, your voice has a very sonorous quality. It's not like my crooked Great Lakes accent, which barges into things that I say here and there.
a lot of times I get your voice just puts me to sleep in a good way, in a good way.
Well, I have to say, I think the editing on it is really good too.
Yeah,
And I think some people who listen are curious. I mean, do you sit down and write these things out, like, and then read it, or are you kind of speaking off the cuff? It seems like it's too rich for you to have just extemporaneously delivered this.
yeah, it's a little bit of both. I do a lot of planning and writing ahead of time, and then like I'll improvise on in the moments depending. But the main thing is you probably tell listening to this, I have a tendency to ramble. So I wanted to do as little rambling as possible. So that's one of the reasons I plan these out. I'd spend a couple of months researching the topic and making sure I do everything in order and get the quotes and have a good pace. And
Well, I encourage listeners to check it out because it is a tight podcast. There's so many people who have podcasts like me who are just like, let's just wing it and talk for an hour, but this is tight.
thank you.
All
Yeah,
right,
I
I'm gonna
appreciate that.
ask like one parting question. You've got the Loeb Library behind you. Alex Petkas is thrown on a desert island. Which 5 volumes is he taking?
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna have to take Plato's Phaedrus.
Good choice.
Um, I'll take uh Plutarch's Pericles. I'll take um I'll take the Iliad. Uh I'll take ooh, man. I probably would I'll take Marcus Aurelius because I should, if you're on a desert island, you're gonna need that. and and then um I would probably after that take um some tragedy, probably gonna be some Sophocles.
Okay.
Yeah, to get me through it.
Fantastic. Awesome choices. Well, Alex, it's a pleasure always to talk to you. Thanks for talking with me. Anybody who's interested in his work, certainly follow him on Twitter. Look in publications like Man's World and some other places. Forthcoming article in the American Mind. Alex, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Appreciate the time.